Mr. Robert?
Yeah, that's me.
Sign here, please. Good luck.
Hello?
Robert, fix it. Do you know who this is?
YouTube?
We've been watching you. We need your help. You must review the GPUs before they come.
But I don't do that anymore.
They're already here.
Who?
They're called the haters. Activate the program now. I'm counting on you.
He's over there.
Oh shit. What do you think? The Nvidia GTX1070. Could it be the new best budget GPU out there for less than $100? Let's check it out. Yeah, so I wanted to take a closer look at the GTX 1070. So now this is the third one that I have picked up. They're popping up all over the place. And I was, as you have seen maybe in videos a year ago, I was all about the GTX 1060 because that to me was the best budget card. The alternative was the Rx580. But now as new games come out, the 1060 kind of isn't cutting it anymore. Also, they're getting a little bit harder to find. At least the good ones. There's still the little cheap single fan ones around, but it's really confusing. So I just wanted to kind of touch back on that subject, because if you're searching now, everything's changed from a year ago. It's not just 1060, 1070, 1080 anymore. The 1060 comes in 3 gigabyte and 6 gigabyte. So if you don't specify which 1060 you're talking about, and you just say 1060, you're not actually giving all of the information. And as far as price goes, so last year when I was really focusing on the 1060, they were going for about 75, 80 bucks. People would be asking 100. The 1070 was more in the 150, 160-ish price range, and then the 1080 was basically $200 then. So now it's different. So the 1080 I just bought for $80, not this 1070, but a 1080. I bought for $80, which is a pretty good deal. I bought a 1070 for $50, and I bought a 1060 3 gigabyte for $30. Now, I specifically look for 1060s all the time, and they're just not available anymore. They're drying up. Even though it was the most popular card at one point, they're kind of getting hard to find. So now the 1070s are popping up. So one 1070 was 50, one 1070 was 70, and then the one you see here, I traded for an Rx580. No, I'm sorry. I traded for an Rx570. And you would say, well, why would someone trade you a 1070 for an Rx570? That doesn't seem fair. But actually, this user had a Mac that he was building, a Mac OS based system. And the Mac doesn't play well with the Nvidia cards. It takes a lot more work to make them work properly. But if you have an Rx570 or Rx580, it works easily. So also this 1070 is really big. And I'm not sure what his setup was, but he preferred to have the smaller card. So it worked out for both of us. So yeah, I mean, it's now, so let's say a 1060 is, let's call it $50 at this point for a 6 gigabyte. A 1070, let's say, is $75 now. And then a 1080 is $100 now. So which one would you choose? Now we've seen online basically that a 1060 is good, a 1070 is better, and a 1080 is better than the 1070. But I'm starting to like the 1070 now because if you're on a budget system, we're talking extreme budget PC, I think that you don't necessarily need a 1080 because I had a 1080, I put it in my system and it was kind of better, you know, it was bottlenecking a little bit. It was better than my old motherboard system that I had. Now, if you could find a 1080 for less than $100, of course you would buy it because that's a good deal. But what I would do is see if maybe when you're searching, look for a 1070. There's a lot. It's weird because they weren't, all I ever saw was 1060 and 1080 before last year. Now I see 1070s all the time. I don't know where all of these came from. They're just popping up as people upgrade, I guess. But in my opinion, the 1070 is basically just a better 1060. Even though a 1070 is technically just a watered down 1080, I would think of it this way because the 1060 has 6 gigabytes of memory. And the reason why the Rx580 beats the 1060 is because it has 8 gigabytes of memory. So the 1070 has 8 gigabytes of memory. So the 1070 is basically the 1060 plus, or you want to call it the 1060 Ti, if that was a thing. So it's a 1070 is a 1060 with more cores and 8 gigabytes of memory. So that's what you want. But here's the key factor between the three, 1060, 1070, 1080, when you're building a budget system. 1060 is 120 watt power requirement. So it's very easy to run that in any system. The 1070 is 150 watt requirement. So it's not as easy, but it's doable in an older system. The 1080 can be as much as, even though it says it's 180. So a 1080 is a 180 watt card. Now at this point, you need a much, much bigger power supply, and you can't necessarily put that in an old Dell HP system easily. Also, they're much bigger and harder to fit. When I was doing overclocks on the 1080 that I had recently, it was pulling 193 watts. So that is not friendly to a budget system at all. So I think the 1070 now is the sweet spot of Nvidia. Of course, people would say, well, you know, the 1650 and 1660 and 1660 Super those are the new good cards, right? But you don't find those used as much as these. These are popping up more. A 1660, I just was looking for one. 1660 is still going for more than $100. Some people are asking $125. So I think the 1070, if you can find one, is really the best, in my opinion, budget card as of the end of 2024. I like the Rx580 as well, but those are really, really hard to find. I have one, but you look for Rx580. I mean, if you can find one, I would go with that, but they're pretty hard to find. So gaming-wise, I don't have any game footage or anything, but it's when I went from 1060 to 1070 in 1080p, what it just did is it allowed me to just put all the settings on max. So it's not necessarily faster. I mean, technically it's faster, but it's 1080. You kind of have to run like low to medium settings on games. But if you have a 1070 or a 1080, you can just max it out, right? As long as there's not a bottleneck in your system. And then of course 1070 was sold as a 1440p card, which it is capable of. But when we're talking about these low-end gaming systems that I work with, that's not really a thing because you can't do 1440. And if you only have $200 for the whole PC, you really don't have a 1440p monitor. So we're just talking about 1080. And then the 1080p. And then so the GTX 1080 was obviously significantly faster than the 1070, but I just feel like at that point you don't need any more performance unless you plan on upgrading the system later and then just keeping the 1080. I think that if you were going to think about doing that, you would look for a 1080 Ti instead and just pay a little bit more and have that carry over. But it's weird. The 1070 to me is kind of almost better than the 1080. Unless they're the same price. If they're the same price, then obviously you get the 1080. But I feel like you save a few bucks if you go with the 1070. And then you can put that money towards, your future setup. So what do you think? For $75, is the GTX 1070 the best value under $100 versus the Rx580, 590, 1080, 1060? I really want to know your opinion on this one. And I personally wasn't really sold on the 1070. It just seemed to me like if you could get a deal on a 1080, that's what you would go for. But now that I've had the 1080 and the 1070, I kind of would just take the 1070. I mean, the 1080 is kind of overkill for what I would use it for. There is the 1070 Ti, but that is really, really hard to find. I did overclock the 1070, and I was able to sort of approach 1080 levels. So that's good, but at the end of the day, it's just a decent card, and it's sad for me to say that the 1060 just doesn't cut it anymore. And that was my favorite card. So unfortunately, we didn't get to do too much testing on this one. I posted it on Java for $100 and it sold right away. So that just tells you that the demand is there for these 1070s. 1080s as far as budget GPUs. I was able to play Fortnite just a little bit, and like I said, all it lets you do is raise the detail. It's still gonna be, because I cap at 120 FPS, it's still 120 FPS, it just lets me do it more. So anyway, that's the video. Let me know what you think. If you have a better idea, I'd be glad to hear it.